My wife and my best friend destroyed my life in a single night. And 10 years later, they're about to find out exactly who they're dealing with. If you've ever trusted someone completely, your partner, your closest friend, and had them stab you in the back at the same time, this story is going to hit different. Because this isn't just about betrayal. This is about what happens when a man loses everything, disappears from the world, rebuilds himself in silence, and then walks back in through the front door as the one person who holds the future of his betrayers in his hands. Stay with me, because this story goes places you won't see coming. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell stories on this channel that will mess with your head in the best way possible. Drop a like too. It genuinely helps us bring more stories like this one to you. Let me take you back to 2013. Marcus was 34 years old. He had a good life. Not perfect, but solid. He worked in finance, spent years climbing his way up from nothing, and had built something real. He wasn't rich, but he was stable. He had a house, a car, and more importantly, he had two people he trusted more than anyone else on the planet. The first was his wife, Diana. They'd been together since college, 11 years total. 6 of them married. She was smart, driven, and Marcus genuinely believed she was the one person in the world who actually knew him. Not just the version of him he showed at work or at family dinners. The real version. The guy who was scared of failing. The guy who called his mom every Sunday. The guy who still kept a photo of his late father in his wallet. Diana knew all of that, and Marcus thought that meant something. The second person was his best friend, Ryan. They'd known each other since they were kids, grew up on the same street, went to the same school, got into trouble together, got out of trouble together. Ryan was the kind of friend who showed up when things went wrong. When Marcus's dad passed away, Ryan was the first person at the door. When Marcus lost his first job out of college, Ryan let him sleep on his couch for 2 months without charging him a dime. For over 20 years, Marcus would have said Ryan was more like a brother than a friend. So when everything fell apart, it didn't just hurt. It shattered something inside of him that took years to even name. It started with small things, the kind of things you notice but talk yourself out of, because the alternative explanation is too painful to sit with. Diana started coming home later. Not every night, but enough. She started having private conversations on her phone, stepping into the other room when Marcus walked in. She got quieter at dinner, less interested in the weekends they used to plan together. Marcus told himself it was stress. She'd been under a lot of pressure at work. She'd mentioned wanting a promotion. Maybe she was just focused. He believed that because he wanted to believe it. Around the same time, Ryan started being a little harder to reach. Canceled a couple of their usual hangouts. Said he was busy. Marcus didn't push it. He had his own stuff going on. But then one Thursday night in October, Marcus came home early from a work trip. His flight got changed, and he didn't bother texting Diana ahead because he figured he'd just surprise her. Maybe order food, watch something together, have a normal night. He pulled into the driveway and saw Ryan's car parked outside. At first, he thought nothing of it. Ryan had come over without Marcus plenty of times. He and Diana got along. That was never weird. But when Marcus walked through the front door, the house was completely quiet. in a way that felt wrong. No TV, no voices, just silence. He called out Diana's name. Nothing. He walked down the hallway, and that's when the door to the bedroom opened. I'm not going to spell out every detail of what Marcus saw. You already know. But I'll tell you this. It wasn't a moment that hit him like a punch. It was slower than that. It was like watching something in slow motion that your brain refuses to process because it simply does not fit inside the version of reality you've been living in. Diana saw him first. She froze. Ryan didn't even look at him right away, and in that silence, that horrible, suffocating silence, 11 years of marriage and 22 years of friendship just dissolved into nothing. Marcus didn't scream. He didn't cry. He walked back to the front door, got in his car, and drove for 3 hours without knowing where he was going. When he finally stopped, he was parked outside a gas station in the middle of nowhere, and he just sat there in the dark, trying to figure out how to breathe. What happened next was almost worse than the night itself, because Diana didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't fall apart with guilt. Instead, she got strategic. Within 2 weeks of that night, she had already spoken to a lawyer. A good one. The kind you hire when you're not looking to settle. You're looking to win. Marcus, still in shock, still processing, still sleeping on a friend's couch because he couldn't bring himself to go back to that house, hired his own lawyer late. Too late, it turned out. The divorce process dragged on for almost 8 months, and by the end of it, Marcus had lost the house. He lost a significant portion of his savings because some of those assets had Diana's name on them. And she made sure her lawyer brought up every account, every investment, every joint asset they had ever touched together. She painted Marcus as emotionally unavailable, as someone who had neglected the marriage. Her lawyer was sharp, and Marcus's lawyer was expensive, but not sharp enough. He walked out of that divorce with a fraction of what he'd put in, and a mountain of legal debt on top of it. And Ryan? Ryan never once reached out to apologize. Not a single text, not a voicemail, nothing. The two of them, Diana and Ryan, ended up together officially about 3 months after the divorce was finalized. They posted photos on social media. They looked happy. They looked unbothered. And Marcus, who had spent the last year of his life getting legally dismantled by the woman he loved and ghosted by the man he considered a brother, was alone, broke, and invisible. Some of the people in his social circle drifted toward Diana and Ryan's side, not because they knew the full story, but because that's what people do. They go where the energy is. And Diana was charismatic. She had a way of shaping a narrative. So Marcus became the background character in his own life story. He moved to a smaller city about 4 hours away, got a cheap apartment, started working again. Nothing glamorous, just enough to keep the lights on while he figured out his next move. And for a while, he was just surviving. But here's the thing about Marcus that nobody, not Diana, not Ryan, not any of those people who quietly chose a side, understood. Marcus had always been good with money. Not just good, exceptionally good. The reason he'd worked in finance wasn't because someone pushed him into it. It was because numbers made sense to him in a way that people sometimes didn't. He understood markets. He understood timing. He understood risk. And now, for the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely nothing left to lose. Hey, real quick, if this story is hitting you the way I think it is, drop a comment right now. Tell me, would you have done what Marcus did, or would you have walked away for good? I read every single comment, and if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. We drop stories like this every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. The next 3 years of Marcus's life looked like nothing from the outside. No big moves, no announcements, no LinkedIn updates. Just a guy in a small apartment, working, reading, and thinking. But inside that silence, something was building. Marcus had always been disciplined with money, even when he had very little of it. So he did something that most people in his position wouldn't have had the patience to do. He started small, not with a grand plan, not with some movie moment where everything clicks into place at once. He just started putting money into positions he understood deeply. Small investments, careful ones, the kind that don't make you rich overnight, but don't wipe you out either. He was in no rush, and that was the thing people never got about Marcus. Most people, when they get hurt the way he got hurt, either fall apart completely or go looking for revenge right away. They make emotional decisions. They do something dramatic too fast, and it costs them. Marcus did neither. He just went quiet and went to work. By the end of year 2, his investments were doing well enough that he could start taking slightly bigger positions. He was reading constantly. Industry reports, market trends, company financials. He started consulting for a small private equity firm part-time, and the people there quickly realized he wasn't just good. He was the kind of analyst who saw things 3 moves ahead. They offered him a full-time senior position. He turned it down and asked for equity instead. They gave it to him. That decision alone changed everything. The firm had 2 very strong years back-to-back, and Marcus's stake in it grew in a way that even he hadn't projected. He wasn't a millionaire overnight, but he was building real, serious wealth for the first time in his life. Wealth that was entirely his. No joint accounts, no shared assets. Nothing with anyone else's name on it. Just his. He moved to a better apartment, but kept living below his means. He drove the same used car he'd had for 4 years. He didn't post on social media. He didn't go back to the circles he used to run in. He just kept building. And somewhere around year 5, Marcus made a decision that most people would have called crazy. He left the firm with a very healthy exit and started his own investment vehicle, a private fund. Small at first, but focused. He had developed a specific eye for mid-size companies that were underperforming, not because their core business was broken, but because of bad leadership or poor financial structure. He would come in, restructure, optimize, and either turn them around or position them for acquisition. He was good at it, quietly, consistently, almost invisibly good at it. By year 7, his fund had a reputation in certain circles, not a loud reputation. Marcus specifically didn't want his name attached to press releases or industry profiles. He operated through a holding company with a name that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. That was intentional, because Marcus hadn't forgotten. He hadn't spent the last 7 years obsessing over Diana and Ryan. That's not who he was. He wasn't the kind of person who woke up every morning thinking about revenge. That kind of obsession eats people alive, and Marcus had watched it happen to others. He wasn't going to let two people who had already taken so much from him also take his mental peace. But he hadn't forgotten either. He knew, in a general way, where they were. Not because he was tracking them, but because people talk. Old mutual friends would occasionally mention something. He heard that Diana and Ryan had gotten married about 2 years after his divorce was finalized. He heard they were both working at the same mid-sized tech company, a firm called Vantage Solutions. Diana had moved into a HR leadership role, and Ryan was in business development. Marcus filed that information away and moved on with his day. But then, in the spring of year 9, something landed on his desk that stopped him cold. One of his analysts brought him a file on a company that matched his fund's acquisition profile almost perfectly. Mid-sized tech firm, strong underlying product, consistent revenue but shrinking margins, leadership team that had made a series of bad structural decisions over the past few years. The company was bleeding quietly, and the board was starting to panic. The company was Vantage Solutions. Marcus sat with that file for a long time. He went through the financials line by line. He looked at the org chart. He read the performance reviews the analyst had pulled from public filings. And everything in him that was a professional, every analytical instinct he had developed over a decade, told him clearly that this was a good acquisition target. The company had real value underneath all the dysfunction. With the right restructuring, it could be turned around. His fund would make money on it. That part wasn't even a question. The question was everything else, because Diana was still there. Ryan was still there. And if Marcus moved on this acquisition, which his team was pushing for because the numbers made sense, he would become, quietly, anonymously, the man who owned the company where the two people who had destroyed his life now worked. He thought about it for 3 days. He talked to nobody about it. He just sat with it, running through scenarios, asking himself what his actual motive was. Was this a good business decision, or was this personal? And if it was personal, did that automatically make it wrong? On the 3rd day, he called his lead analyst and told him to move forward. The acquisition process took several months. Marcus's holding company made an offer to the board. The board, desperate and out of options, accepted. And the deal closed quietly with almost no press coverage, because that's how Marcus structured it. No announcements, no fanfare. Just a change in ownership that most of the employees at Vantage Solutions didn't even fully understand at first, including Diana and Ryan. They had no idea who had just bought their company. Nobody there did. But things started changing almost immediately after the acquisition closed, because Marcus sent in his restructuring team, people he trusted completely, and they began a full operational and personnel review. Every department, every role, every salary against every output. It was standard practice for his fund. He did it with every acquisition, but this time he was paying close attention to the reports. And what came back from the Vantage Solutions review was not good, at least not for some people. Ryan's entire business development division had been severely underperforming for 18 months. The numbers were bad. The client retention rate in his department was one of the worst in the company. And the review found that Ryan had been inflating projected numbers in internal reports, not illegally, but in a way that was misleading enough to have kept him in his position longer than his performance should have allowed. Diana's HR department had its own issues. There were complaints from employees about favoritism in promotion decisions. Nothing that had risen to a formal legal issue, but enough to paint a picture of someone who used her position to protect people she liked and quietly push out people she didn't. The restructuring team brought Marcus the findings in a clean, organized report. He read every page, and then he called a meeting. "Okay, I need you to stop for a second, because what's about to happen in part 3 is the part that got me when I first heard this story. Before we get there, drop a comment and tell me, do you think Marcus is going to use his power to get revenge? Or do you think he's going to let them keep their jobs? I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you're still not subscribed, what are you doing? Hit that button right now, because the ending of this story is something you need to see through to the end. The meeting Marcus called wasn't with Diana and Ryan. Not yet. First, he sat down with his restructuring team and went through every finding from the Vantage Solutions review, department by department, person by person. He asked detailed questions. He pushed back on certain conclusions. He made sure that every recommendation his team was making was based purely on the data, on the performance numbers, on what the business actually needed to survive and grow. He was meticulous about it, because he needed to be absolutely certain, in his own mind, more than anyone else's, that what was coming next was a business decision and not a personal one. And when he was done going through every page of that report, the conclusion was clear regardless of who the people involved were. The business development division needed a complete overhaul. Several roles were being eliminated. Ryan's position was one of them. And the HR department was being restructured under new leadership. Diana's role, as it currently existed, was being dissolved. The numbers justified it. The performance data justified it. Any investor looking at that company objectively would have made the same calls. Marcus signed off on the restructuring plan. And then he did something that nobody on his team expected. He asked to be in the room when the affected employees were notified. His team lead looked at him a little sideways when he said that. It wasn't something Marcus typically did. Usually he stayed at a distance during the personnel side of restructuring. That wasn't his role, and he knew it. But this time, he said he wanted to be present, and nobody questioned him further, because he was the one who wrote the checks. The notifications were scheduled over 2 days. Most employees were handled by the restructuring team directly, but Marcus made sure that Diana and Ryan were scheduled for the same slot, in the same room, on the same afternoon. He wanted them together when it happened. Not because he wanted a scene, not because he wanted to watch them fall apart. If you're expecting some dramatic confrontation where Marcus walks in and flips a table and delivers a monologue about everything they did to him, that's not this story. That's not who Marcus was. He wanted them together because he wanted them to have each other when they heard the news. He genuinely did. Whatever he felt about what they had done, he wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed watching people suffer. He just wasn't built that way. So that afternoon, Diana and Ryan were brought into a conference room on the 4th floor of the Vantage Solutions office. They thought it was a general meeting about the restructuring. A lot of those had been happening since the acquisition, and most employees were nervous, but hadn't expected to be personally affected. The restructuring team lead went through the standard process. She explained the changes to the division. She walked through the performance findings. She was professional and direct, and didn't leave room for a lot of pushback because the data was what it was. Diana and Ryan sat there and took it. And then, when the team lead finished, the door opened, and Marcus walked in. The silence that followed was one of those silences that has a weight to it. Diana's face went through about 6 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Ryan looked like he'd seen something that his brain was refusing to categorize correctly. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down across from them. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked calm in that particular way that people look calm when they've had a very long time to figure out exactly who they are. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then he said, "And I want you to really hear this," he said. "I didn't buy this company because of you two. I bought it because the numbers made sense. Everything that's happening today is based on performance data, not on anything personal. I need you to know that." Diana opened her mouth and then closed it again. Ryan looked at the table. Marcus continued, "I'm not here to make a speech. I'm not here to list everything that happened 10 years ago. You both know what you did, and I think you've known for a long time that it wasn't right. I don't need to relitigate that." He paused. "But I am here because I thought you deserved to hear this from me directly, rather than finding out later who the new owner was and spending the next few years wondering if I'd been watching. I wasn't watching. I was building. And this, right here, is just what building eventually looks like." Diana's eyes were wet. She didn't say anything for a long moment. And then, quietly, she said she was sorry. Not in a big dramatic way. Just quietly, like someone finally putting down something they'd been carrying for a long time. Ryan didn't say anything at all. He just nodded once, slowly, like a man who had been expecting something like this to find him eventually, and was almost relieved that it finally had. Marcus stood up. He thanked them for their time. He told them the severance package was fair, and that his team would walk them through everything they needed. And then he walked out of that conference room and took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the afternoon sun. And that was it. No revenge. No punishment beyond what the performance data had already decided. No cruelty. Just a man who had rebuilt himself from zero, who now stood at the top of something real, and who had the discipline to keep his hands clean even when nobody would have blamed him for doing otherwise. Here's the part of this story that stuck with me the longest, though. About 6 weeks after the restructuring, Marcus received an email. It was from Ryan. It wasn't long. Ryan wasn't asking for his job back. He wasn't making excuses. He just said that he'd spent a long time telling himself a version of events that made him the less guilty party, and that seeing Marcus in that conference room, calm, successful, completely without bitterness, had finally broken that story apart. He said he was sorry. For real this time. Not because he needed something, just because it was true, and he'd waited too long to say it. Marcus read it twice. He didn't respond right away. He sat with it for a couple of days, the same way he'd sat with the Vantage Solutions acquisition file, thinking clearly instead of reacting fast. And then he wrote back 2 sentences. He said, "I appreciate you saying that. I hope things get better for you." That's all. Because that's the kind of person Marcus had become over those 10 years. Not someone who needed the last word. Not someone who needed the other person to suffer. Just someone who had done the work, built the life, and gotten to a place where he genuinely didn't need anything from the people who had hurt him anymore. That's actually the hardest thing to pull off after betrayal. Not the revenge part. Revenge is easy. Revenge is emotional and immediate, and it feels like relief even when it's destroying you. The hard part is getting to a place where you genuinely don't need it. Where you look at the people who burned your life down and you feel, not nothing exactly, but something close to nothing. Something quiet. Something clean. Marcus got there. And that, more than the money, more than the acquisition, more than any moment in that conference room, that's the real comeback. Because the person who walked into that meeting wasn't a broken man who drove 3 hours in the dark after finding out his wife and best friend had been lying to his face. That man was gone. The person who walked in had taken every painful, humiliating, devastating thing that had happened to him and turned it into fuel. Quietly, without asking anyone for permission, without waiting for an apology that might never come. He just decided who he wanted to be on the other side of all that pain. And then he went and became that person. And if you take nothing else from this story, take that. Because life is going to hand you moments that feel like they're designed to end you. People you trusted completely are going to let you down in ways you never saw coming. And in those moments, the easiest thing in the world is to let that define you. To stay in the wreckage. To build your whole identity around what was done to you. But there's another option. You go quiet. You go to work. You stop explaining yourself to people who weren't there. You stop looking for validation from the people who hurt you, and you build something. Slowly, patiently, without anyone watching, until one day, the life you've built speaks louder than anything they ever took from you. That's the Marcus way. And honestly, it's the only way that actually works. If this story hit you, subscribe. Because we've got more coming that you don't want to miss.